let's talk about three situations in the US, in the UK, and right here in New York, talking to experts that can really drill down. Now, we're talking about legislation on a federal level. Why is it? How do we use the law? But I want you to hear how the law is used in Libby, Montana, New York City, 9/11, as well as UK. I'd like to ask my dear friend and colleague, David McCumber, to come up. It's quick, it's 5 minutes, but tell us what's happened in Libby, what do we need to know, and how do we learn to go forward? Welcome, David. I forgot to tell him that he's an editor and journalist and an award-winning author, so.
I only have 5 minutes. Stop. Thank you, Linda. It's great to be back at ADAO, and it's particularly meaningful to be at Mount Sinai. We at the Seattle Post-Intelligencer broke the story of the tragedy of Libby in 1999. One might think that given the EPA's 20-year presence, they showed up 3 days after our story ran to prove us wrong and stayed 20 years to try to clean it up. You'd think that based on that and based on all that has become public with Libby, that certain things would be resolved. But the tragedy of Libby continues. Just quickly, 700 people from Libby have died, thereabouts, probably more. Thousands more have been diagnosed with asbestos-related disease from exposure to tainted vermiculite ore and zonalite vermiculite products containing tremolite asbestos. Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railway shipped thousands of tons while the zonalite mine was open. The railway has been attempting for years to minimize its potential financial consequences of being a defendant in asbestos litigation. This fight has focused on, of all things, a community clinic. This is a clinic that has seen more than a third of the inhabitants of this little town diagnosed with lung abnormality and with full-blown asbestos-related disease. And so the target in order to stop the diagnostic process and reduce BNSF's liability has been this little clinic that has been set up with the help of the federal government to take care of the people of Libby, to screen, to diagnose, to educate, to outreach. And for the last 7 years or so, BNSF has been actively at war with this little clinic, trying to bury them in paper and process and make their lives sufficiently miserable that they cannot continue to diagnose asbestos-related disease. This is what I call the session, community clinic run over by a train. That's a BNSF locomotive, and that's Libby, Montana. In a jury trial in Montana's, quote, asbestos court, which should probably be called kangaroo court instead, it's presided over by a judge who has experience as an asbestos defense litigator. He represented the state of Montana against the clinic and in trying to defend the state against asbestos liability. And yet he did not recuse himself. He took this case after a number of adverse rulings from this judge. Card was found to have filed 337 false medical claims. They tried, when the jury came back with this, the clinic said, "What claims? Tell us more. Tell us how these were false claims." The judge cut them off and said, "No, you don't get to know that." The case, as far as can be told, turned on a ruling by the judge that claims based solely on imaging read by outside radiologists and not not with clinical diagnoses in the clinic, that all of those should be thrown out as invalid. And so those are believed to be the 337 cases that a 7-person civil jury with no radiologists present found to be invalid and fraudulent. Where does this clinic go to get its reputation back? Meanwhile, BNSF, has managed to succeed in preventing Max Baucus, distinguished former senator from Montana, who wrote the legislation that enabled the clinic, barred him from testifying. And this against a backdrop where BNSF is, just found liable for the deaths of 2 patients and faces hundreds of other cases. Now that they have this result from the asbestos court, BNSF has forced the clinic's closure by trying to seize its assets. Now the clinic is still operating without its real estate and assets. Tracy McNew, who just left, the executive director of the clinic, is doing the very best she can. They're doing mobile screening. They're reaching out to patients as much as they can. But she and Dr. Brad Black, our Selikoff Award winner, face continuing litigation now because of this verdict, as malpractice suits are sprouting because of it. Meanwhile, this judge has criticized the federal government for not pulling its funding from the clinic. Their grant was recently renewed, but their continuing funding path is unclear, uncertain at best. Dr. Black is typically worried about his patients. He's worried about the existing patients who've been diagnosed. They still need monitoring and care, and there'll be more cases, he knows, as the latency period progresses. I was just talking to Tracy, and she said, yes, we're still getting new diagnoses in Libby, and we will for a while. So she said it pretty clearly. BNSF has been focused on putting us out of business because more diagnosed asbestos cases mean more exposure for them, and we're the only ones doing the diagnosing.